Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where people didn't dare say what they meant, but would absolutely hand you a daisy and let that do the talking. It's the world of Victorian flower language, a place where a bouquet could confess love, issue an insult, or even propose marriage. All without a single spoken word. You're standing outside a parlor in 1848 London. Your boots are damp from the drizzle, your gloves are slightly frayed, and in your hand? A wilting bouquet you picked up in a rush. You thought it was sweet, roses, maybe some forget-me-nots, a sprig of basil to make it fresh. But as the maid opens the door and you step inside, you spot the hostess's face tighten just slightly. A raised eyebrow, a glance at the flowers. And just like that, you've said something you can't take back. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Drop it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You set the flowers down on a delicate side table, mahogany, polished, a little too shiny. The parlor is warm, full of the faint, dusty scent of old books and vanilla-scented wax. The ladies here all wear lace and suspicion. The men sip tea with the precision of surgeons. Conversations flutter around the room like moths avoiding flame. And your little bouquet? It's doing all the talking. See, in the mid-19th century, especially among the English upper class, flowers weren't just decorations. They were vocabulary. Entire dictionaries were published, florography manuals, with titles like The Language of Flowers or Flora's Dictionary. They claimed to decode the emotional DNA of every stem and petal. Give someone a red rose? Passionate love. A yellow carnation? Disdain. Add a sprig of rosemary? I remember. Put it upside down in the bouquet? You are rejecting the sentiment. And heaven forbid you forget the lace doily. Historians still argue whether Victorians truly used these floral messages in day-to-day life, or whether it was more a literary or romanticized pastime. Some say it was all in the books, not the bouquets. Others argue it was absolutely real, especially in courtship rituals, where expressing affection out loud was considered vulgar. You take a seat beside a somber woman in deep blue velvet. Her bouquet sits on her lap like a tiny, colorful accusation, snapdragons, lavender, and a few violets. You're trying not to stare, but if you had your floral dictionary, you'd read her message loud and clear. Snapdragons, deception. Lavender, mistrust. Violets? Well, modesty, but also mourning. Across the room, a man shifts in his chair and suddenly drops a white camellia from his pocket. A few glances dart toward it. He quickly retrieves it. But the message is out: admiration, perhaps unrequited. Or maybe a rebuke for being too forward. It depends on context, which was half the fun, and half the danger, of this flowery game. You glance at your own bouquet again and realize, with a slight sinking feeling, that the basil you included doesn't just smell nice. It means hate. Like, literal hatred. Basil. You paired it with forget-me-nots, which are fine, they mean true love or remembrance, but the basil cancels that out. And the roses? Were they white or pink? White meant purity, pink meant grace. But what if they're off-white? Now you're in murky territory. You've basically just handed someone a handwritten letter that says, "Hey, I both love and loathe you," gracefully. People didn't just guess these meanings. They carried little flower dictionaries around. Some were discreet, small enough to tuck in a sleeve or pocket, much like prayer books or compact mirrors. Others were lavishly illustrated, printed on thick, creamy paper, with woodcut drawings and gilded titles. There was even debate over the order of flowers in a bouquet. First flower? Primary message. Second? Modifies the first. Third? Supporting context. Want to say I long for your friendship, but I can't trust you? That's ivy, zinnias, and a single marigold. Want to say back off, you smell like regret? That's wormwood and heliotrope. And while you're chuckling now, remember, there were no texts. No secret Instagram DMs. No late night "you up?" messages. If you were a young woman in 1850 trying to hint to someone that you might be willing to consider a dance, you didn't say it. You handed him a tiny bouquet with your gloved hand, smiled just barely, and then turned away. The message? Entirely floral. Now you understand why your hostess looked alarmed. You might have just told her you admire her deeply but think her son is morally bankrupt. Who knows? You certainly don't. but everyone else in the room is trying to decode it like it's a murder mystery. One quirky tidbit that often gets overlooked: some meanings varied by region. A chrysanthemum in England symbolized truth, but in France? It's used for graves. So a bouquet that seems romantic in Manchester could look like a death threat in Marseille. Awkward. Still, there's something charming about it all, isn't there? The idea that every petal holds a message. That even in silence, you can speak. That when the world expected you to be composed and polite and never too forward, a handful of flowers could scream the things you dared not say. So you sit there, clutching your regrettably spicy bouquet, and wonder what message you'll send next. Maybe you'll find the right combination to say exactly what you mean, or maybe, like most Victorians, you'll find yourself lost in a tangle of meanings that even a dictionary can't quite clarify. The room smells faintly of wax and violets, and your bouquet sits awkwardly on the little lacquered table like a half-baked apology. You try to act casual, but the whole scene feels theatrical, like you've been dropped into an overly polite soap opera written entirely in petals. And now, you wonder, where did all this come from? Who decided a marigold meant grief, or that a daffodil could express chivalry? The answer, at least, the popular one, starts with a woman named Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. Now, you wouldn't expect the daughter of an English duke to end up decoding romantic symbolism from a faraway land, but Lady Mary was anything but ordinary. Born in 1689, she married a diplomat and found herself in the heart of the Ottoman Empire in the early 1700s. Traipsing around Constantinople while everyone else in England was still wringing their hands over powdered wigs. She was fascinated by the customs there, particularly by what she claimed was a local tradition of using flowers to send secret messages, a practice called salam. This wasn't Victorian sentimentality yet, it was playful, clever, and full of innuendo. She wrote vividly about it in her letters home, and when those letters were later published, they caused quite the stir among the tea-drinking classes of Britain. Imagine getting wind of a society where women exchanged messages with plants. It was just scandalous and exotic enough to be irresistible. Historians still argue whether Lady Mary exaggerated the importance of salam or misunderstood it entirely. Some scholars say it was never as complex or symbolic as she made it sound. Others believe she stumbled upon a real cultural practice that the West later dramatized into something far more elaborate. Either way, her letters planted the seed. Pun entirely intended. Fast forward to the early 19th century, and flowerography, literally, the writing of flowers had become the thing to do among the well-to-do. And it wasn't just English society, the French, Americans, and even Russians got into it. But in Britain, with its rigid manners and obsession with codes of conduct, the idea bloomed into full-blown linguistic botany. You picture Lady Mary in her ornate Ottoman gown, quill in hand, scribbling down the meanings of tulips and hyacinths while sipping thick coffee on a shaded veranda. She couldn't have known her travel observations would one day spark a publishing craze that saw dozens of floral dictionaries flooding bookstores and boudoirs alike. Some of these manuals were charmingly inconsistent. One dictionary might claim that a striped carnation meant refusal, while another insisted it symbolized flirtation. So yes, confusing. But also perfect for a society that thrived on ambiguity. You could send a bouquet with just enough wiggle room to claim innocence if someone misinterpreted your message. Oh no, I meant admiration, not envy. Must be your florist's fault. Here's a quirky detail for you. In many of these dictionaries, there were flowers that meant nothing at all, blank entries. Think about that. A flower so meaningless, it got included just to be labeled as useless. The ultimate botanical wallflower. Back in your Victorian drawing room, the hostess excuses herself and floats away, skirts rustling softly. You catch sight of her bouquet again. Yellow tulips and some white poppies. That combo, if your memory serves, means hopeless love and forgetfulness. Possibly a dramatic cell phone, or perhaps a sly dig at someone in the room. Either way, it's layered enough to be art. The whole thing starts to feel less like a party and more like a chess match, except instead of pawns and bishops, you're working with honeysuckle and rue. Every floral decision is loaded with implication. Place the rose at the center of the bouquet? It's the main theme. Tuck it subtly behind a daisy? Now it's a secret. Want to reject someone outright? Just hand them a bunch of withered blooms tied with black ribbon. You lean back and try to imagine being a suitor in this society. You're not allowed to say too much. Letters might be intercepted. Gossip spreads faster than influenza. And yet, here's a socially acceptable way to send a clear, fragrant message that says, I adore you. But I also think your cousin is a pompous turnip. It's easy to romanticize all this now, of course. From the safety of modern text messaging, we can laugh about handing someone a primrose to show affection or slipping them a sprig of rue as an apology. But to them, this was serious stuff. A misinterpreted bouquet could derail an entire courtship. A wrongly chosen flower in a funeral arrangement could hint at family scandal. There were stakes. And here's the kicker, this coded language wasn't just for romantic love. It applied to friendship, mourning, suspicion, even professional respect. One record shows a politician sending a peace offering to a rival in the form of olive branches, bluebells, for humility, and white violets, for innocence. No one replied for 2 weeks. Brutal. So, you sit there, your heart beating just a little faster, thinking about Lady Mary, sipping her Ottoman coffee, unknowingly starting a fad that would one day make everyone paranoid about geraniums. You glance around the room again, watching bouquets speak volumes, and wonder, just how fluent do you really want to be? Because once you start to understand the dialect, it's hard to look at a vase the same way again. You glance down at your bouquet again, scrutinizing it like a detective at a crime scene. What exactly did you say with that pink rose, basil, and forget-me-not combo? Did you accidentally propose? Or did you imply the hostess smells like regret and old lace? You're not alone in your confusion, because if any flower carried the full burden of double meanings and social gymnastics, it was the rose. And no, it didn't just mean love. That would have been far too convenient for the Victorians. Roses were the divas of the flower language stage. They came in more varieties than excuses at a card table. Red? Yes, love. Passionate, dramatic, write me sonnets by moonlight kind of love. But dark red? Mourning. Faded pink? Regret. Yellow? Jealousy. Or maybe infidelity. Depends on which floral dictionary you consulted, and which florist you trusted. Historians still argue whether these color-coded meanings were truly standardized or simply spun out of a cultural need for complicated courtship rituals. After all, the Victorians adored layers. Emotional depth was like a game of croquet played on a foggy moor. You were never quite sure who was winning, but you definitely didn't want to appear too eager. You take a moment to imagine being on the receiving end of one of these coded bouquets. A small box arrives at your townhouse, wrapped in linen ribbon. You open it to find a collection of blooms, a crimson rose tucked beside white lilacs and a scattering of verbena. If you're fluent in florography, you know exactly what it says: I burn for you, but I question your sincerity. Bold. Conflicted. Absolutely on brand for a Victorian Wednesday. One particularly mainstream fact that pops up again and again is how roses were often trimmed of thorns, or deliberately left on. A rose with thorns said, there's beauty here, but also danger. Thornless? I am safe. I am tame. Love me, no risk. The drama was built in. And it gets more theatrical. If you tied the stems with a blue ribbon, that meant fidelity. If it was black, it meant sorrow or even vengeance. A ribbon knotted twice? Deep emotion. A single bow? Frivolous intent. Imagine the anxiety of assembling a bouquet. Does this express my undying affection or suggest I hope your dog gets dysentery? Even the way the bouquet was handed over had significance. If you gave it with your right hand, it affirmed the message. Left hand? Rejection. And if the recipient held it upside down? Message inverted. Your I adore you just became kindly remove yourself from my veranda. By now, you're realizing how dangerously loaded your own little flower arrangement was. Pink roses, okay, that's grace and gentle admiration. Not terrible. But basil, as we've established, is a spicy wildcard. In some regions, it meant hatred or poverty, but in others, good wishes. Toss in forget-me-nots, and now your bouquet reads like a dramatic apology from a 19th century soap opera villain. You might as well have sent a live ferret with a bow tie and a note saying, my intentions are confusing, but sincere. There's a quirky side note to all this: some households employed professional bouquet interpreters. Yes, actual hired help who specialized in decoding or assembling flower messages. Think of them as Victorian relationship therapists with access to peonies. And they charged handsomely, especially around Valentine's Day, when the floral stakes were high and one wrong daffodil could lead to romantic disaster. In wealthier circles, the art of florography even spilled into portraits and home decor. Oil paintings might show a noble woman holding a single white rose and a sprig of rue, visually telling the viewer that she was pure, grieving, and probably not in the mood for your nonsense. Embroidered pillows. hair combs, even wallpaper often featured symbolic florals. That damask print in the corner of the room? Not just pretty, it's telling you the hostess once had her heart broken by a man with great sideburns. You find yourself glancing around the parlor, suddenly aware of how many bouquets and single-stem vases are scattered throughout. A bunch of violets beside a music stand, loyalty and modesty. A few sprigs of heather on the windowsill, solitude. And, oof, look at that tall vase by the fireplace, overflowing with yellow roses, fennel, and orange lilies. That's like shouting, "I think you're a liar, and also I'm mad about it, but I still want your attention." You resist the urge to laugh. Or cry. Or both. Now here's a real kicker. Queen Victoria herself was supposedly fond of flower symbolism. It's said she received an enormous bouquet on the day of her coronation, filled with pure and loyal blossoms, white roses, lilies of the valley, and sweet William. The last one may have been a nod to Prince Albert, or just a general symbol of gallantry. But even royal bouquets weren't immune to interpretation. Some historians believe at least one flower in that bouquet may have been misread as an omen. But hey, she kept the throne for over 60 years, so it couldn't have been that bad. Still, you begin to realize the real appeal wasn't just in the drama. It was in the control. In a society where women were often discouraged from speaking boldly, and men from expressing anything too tender, flowers became an emotional loophole. A loophole you could wrap in ribbon and send through a courier, guilt-free, socially acceptable, and deniably cryptic. So, as you sit in this velvet-swathed room, your bouquet slowly browning at the edges, you realize something. Even if you didn't mean to send a message, you did. The moment you chose those flowers, clumsily, with one eye on the price tag and the other on the weather, you entered the world of Victorian floral diplomacy. And once you're in, well, good luck getting out without offending someone's great aunt. You shift uncomfortably in your chair, wondering how much damage a few daisies might have done. They looked so harmless in the shop. Cheerful, even. But in this room, under the chandelier's flickering candlelight, they feel like an accusation. Or worse, an insult. The thing about Victorian flower language was that the more delicate and innocent the bloom appeared, the more venom it could carry. A daisy might say innocence in some circles, sure, but depending on the context, it could also mean "I think you're childish," or even "I know your secret." You thought you were being sweet, but you might as well have tapped someone's shoulder and whispered, "I saw what you did last summer." One mainstream historical fact is that certain flowers became so loaded with double meanings that people actively avoided them in formal arrangements. Lilies, for example, especially white lilies, symbolize purity, yes, but also death. More than one Victorian funeral featured massive lily arrangements meant to honor the dearly departed, but also to whisper a final moral judgment about the deceased's behavior. Historians still argue whether the Victorians took these interpretations seriously, or whether it was more of a parlor game, a way to pass the time while sipping weak tea and pretending not to be bored out of your corset. But based on diary entries, love letters, and florist notes of the time, there's strong evidence that many people believed quite fiercely in the power of petals. And if lilies were dangerous, don't even get started on poppies. Red poppies often meant pleasure or extravagance. White ones could mean oblivion, or forgetfulness. You can see how giving a bouquet of white poppies to a grieving widow could backfire spectacularly. "I'm sorry for your loss," followed by, "but maybe just forget about him." Then there were the wallflowers, literally and symbolically. Delicate blossoms like baby's breath, bachelor's buttons, and Queen Anne's lace. Individually, they meant things like everlasting love or grace under pressure. But they were also seen as safe flowers, used by people too nervous, or too polite, to send stronger messages. Receiving a bouquet heavy on baby's breath was like getting a text that said, "Hey," and nothing else. Suspiciously vague. Probably from someone trying to avoid saying something real. You spot a young man now, maybe 19, hovering near the piano with a small cluster of cornflowers in his hand. He keeps adjusting his cravat and glancing at a girl by the window. The flowers tremble a bit, nerves. Cornflowers symbolize hope and love. A cautious declaration. You watch him gather the courage, step forward, and present the bouquet. She glances down, smiles politely, and then gently turns it upside down. Oof. Inverted bouquet. Message rejected. It's not just a no, it's a floral no. You half expect someone to shout fatality from behind a potted fern. Then there's the case of the lily of the valley, such a sweet, fragrant little thing. It meant return of happiness, but it was also tied to mourning. Widows often wore it tucked into black veils. So if you gave someone that flower, were you promising them a future of joy, or reminding them they'd already lost it? These nuances weren't just imagined. There were literal flower etiquette guides published alongside the dictionaries. Some even included illustrations showing how to hold the bouquet, upright, reverently, or how to decline one without causing scandal. Gently place it on a tray, never the floor. A dropped bouquet in a drawing room could start a week-long feud, like subtweeting someone with floral arrangements. And don't even get us started on mixing lilies with daisies and roses. That combo screamed I respect you, but also deeply mistrust your lifestyle choices. The equivalent of a passive-aggressive Christmas card. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some aristocrats would dry particularly meaningful bouquets and frame them under glass, like mementos of emotional hostage negotiations. One preserved posy was discovered in an old estate labeled June 3rd, his apology. It included rue, yellow carnations, and a single thorny rose. Translation: I regret my betrayal, I know you're angry, and also please don't throw me down the stairs again. You start to realize that every Victorian home must have been a minefield of floral intent. Centerpieces weren't just decoration. They were commentary. Bedroom vases? Emotional barometers. Garden choices? Public statements. A neighbor growing peonies next to foxglove might be trying to say, I'm lovely on the outside, but I've got secrets, and you'd better not cross me. You try to picture this level of unspoken tension in your own life. What if your houseplants started judging your guests? What if that orchid in your kitchen was throwing shade at your Aunt Carol? Now imagine what a wedding looked like. Victorians obsessed over the symbolism of wedding bouquets. Myrtle was essential, symbolizing love and fidelity. Orange blossoms? Fertility. But heaven help the poor bride who included something like columbine, foolishness, or yellow carnations, contempt. There were florists who specialized only in wedding meanings, like botanical therapists for high-stress nuptials. You remember one story, possibly apocryphal but too delightful not to share, of a bride who received a congratulatory bouquet from a jealous cousin. It looked stunning, lavender, yellow roses, red tulips, but hidden beneath the blossoms was a small bundle of dead leaves. Message received: you may be beautiful now, but winter is coming. So here you sit, amidst all this unspoken drama, clutching your bouquet like it might suddenly burst into flames. What you thought was a polite offering may have been the social equivalent of a whispered threat, or an unintentional confession. And you wonder, should you have just brought cookies? You start to understand something as you observe this parlor full of poised smiles and twitching flower stems. Victorian florists weren't just merchants. They were co-conspirators. Linguists with pruning shears. Gossip brokers in aprons. You didn't just walk into a flower shop and say, I'd like something pretty. You walked in, dropped your voice to a near whisper, and said something like, she rejected me last Tuesday at the opera. I need her to feel regret, but not rage. Also, her aunt is visiting. And the florist, without blinking, would begin assembling the perfect bouquet. Step into one of those Victorian flower shops now. It's dim, cool, and smells like crushed mint and damp soil. Wooden counters hold tin buckets overflowing with roses, violets, heliotropes, and things you can't name but assume have dramatic opinions. The florist, an older man with spectacles or a middle-aged woman in full mourning black, depending on the neighborhood, asks no unnecessary questions. This is a transaction of feeling, not small talk. You glance around and see pre-made arrangements already labeled, to impress a widow, polite rejection for cousin, forgive me for the gloves incident. Each is a miniature novella wrapped in ribbon. Mainstream fact: by the 1850s, nearly every town with any pretension of culture had at least one florography-savvy florist. Larger cities like London or Edinburgh had entire chains that prided themselves on offering emotionally literate arrangements. Yes, that was a real marketing phrase. The emotional literacy of a shrub was considered just as important as its freshness. And it wasn't cheap. The more subtle the message, the pricier the bouquet. A few tulips and forget-me-nots might cost you a shilling, but a full arrangement hinting at grudging forgiveness with hopes of eventual reconciliation could run several pounds and take an entire afternoon to design. It was the Victorian equivalent of hiring a ghostwriter to draft your breakup email. One fringe detail many people forget is that some florists developed their own dictionaries, regional, family-specific meanings that deviated from the more popular guides. In Yorkshire, for instance, lavender might mean devotion, while in Bath it meant nervous dishonesty. So a traveling suitor could accidentally propose fidelity and then accuse someone of lying in the same bouquet. just by crossing county lines. You spot a young woman entering the shop, cheeks flushed with the urgency of romantic panic. She whispers to the florist, who nods slowly, selects a few stems, pauses, then changes one out for something thornier. He adds a small white card, but it remains blank, because the flowers are the message. No ink required. Historians still debate just how widespread this practice was outside the gentry. Did the working class engage in florography with the same passion? Or was this primarily an aristocratic pastime, one more layer of exclusivity in an already codified society? Some evidence suggests working-class sweethearts did use flowers symbolically, but far more casually. A single bloom left at a doorstep, or a wildflower tucked behind the ear, might be all that was needed. No dictionaries. No drama. Just instinct. Back in the posh florist's shop, though, you get the sense that every petal is political. Two arrangements wait on the counter. One is tall, dramatic, and loud: scarlet geraniums, purple columbine, and tiger lilies. That's a power move. I'm here, I'm not apologizing. And I'm incredibly stylish. The other is quiet: snowdrops and white violets, with a single sprig of rosemary. Subtle. Wistful. Possibly written by someone with a poet's heart and an ulcer. Here's a fun aside: some florists refuse to sell certain combinations. Too cruel, they'd say. A bouquet mixing yellow roses, jealousy, black ribbon, mourning, and geraniums, stupidity, was essentially an assassination letter in botanical form. Rumor had it that Queen Victoria's personal florist once refused a noblewoman such a bouquet, muttering, "This shop will not be party to social violence." You chuckle imagining it. The idea that someone could walk into a flower shop and be politely refused on the grounds of excessive pettiness. And yet, it makes sense. These florists weren't just decorators, they were emotional messengers, caught between commercial enterprise and social strategy. A bad bouquet wasn't just bad business. It could ignite duels, scandals, or dramatic fainting spells. Florists also functioned as low-grade spies. Think about it: if you're the go-between for half the court's romantic overtures, you know everything. Who's courting whom? Who's snubbing whom? Who sent rue followed by honeysuckle and then didn't show up at the picnic? It's no wonder many florists were known for their tight lips and stricter discretion than most clergymen. You imagine one such florist now, behind the counter, polishing her scissors as she listens. A customer murmurs something vague: "He left London suddenly." She nods, plucks a sprig of fern from a jar. "Then you'll want this," she says softly. Fern, sincerity. Combined with peony, shame. Add a camellia, perhaps red for longing. The bouquet says, "I'm sorry you left. I wish I'd said more." No signature required. And you? You start to appreciate that your earlier flower mishap wasn't just a social blunder. It was a missed opportunity. If you visited the right florist, whispered the right clues, and trusted the magic of metaphor, maybe your bouquet would have told the truth. Or at least a prettier version of it. Instead, you panicked, grabbed the nearest bunch, and now sit in a drawing room being silently judged by a ficus. You're back in the parlor now, bouquet abandoned on the side table like a misunderstood poem. You try to act unbothered, but every time someone glances at it, you wonder, did I just declare war? Or worse, intimacy? This isn't a room, it's a battlefield dressed in silk and lace, and the weapons are peonies. Across the room, a group of ladies pretend not to be listening while very much listening. One of them drops her fan and gasps when another glides past her bouquet without acknowledging it. That wasn't an accident. That was botanical snubbing, and it's a very real part of this silent social opera. In fact, welcome to the glamorous, and deeply petty, world of floral spycraft. The drawing room was one of the few places women could exert real influence in Victorian high society, and they turned it into a theater of coded warfare. If you were clever, charismatic, and fluent in flower language, you didn't need votes or swords. You could orchestrate alliances and rivalries with the casual placement of a vase. Historians still argue whether these strategies were widely practiced or more of a fashionable game among elite women bored out of their tightly corseted minds. But personal diaries, event accounts, and more than a few scandalous letters revealed that at least some women treated floral placement as serious business. Picture this: you're at a dinner party. As guests enter, the hostess has arranged individual bouquets by the place cards. These are not random. If you find a rose and ivy by your plate, you're in favor, romantic loyalty. If it's orange lilies and wormwood, oh dear, passion and bitterness. That means either you're on thin ice or someone saw you leave the garden party with the wrong girl. But drawing room flower placement went far beyond dinner seating. Women would accidentally leave a bouquet on a chair, knowing full well who'd sit there. Or swap a flower from their own nosegay into another's vase while no one was looking. And suddenly, that second bouquet now means, your fiancé has secrets and I know them. All without a single word. It's subtle warfare. Cold. Polite. Devastating. You spot one of these exchanges now. A woman you've not seen before, older, wearing jet beads and gloves that whisper widow, but wealthy, glides to the piano, rearranges the bouquet on top of it, and walks away without making eye contact. She's added a foxglove and removed a sprig of mint. Foxglove, insincerity. Mint, virtue. Someone's about to be accused of faking their piety. You wish you had popcorn. Another guest, flustered and fanning herself too quickly, sends her maid to discreetly move her bouquet out of direct view. Too late. 3 others have already seen the switch, and their eyes meet like clock hands striking midnight. Of course, there were rules to this espionage. Too bold, and you became obvious. Too subtle, and your message went unread. That's where the fan came in, not just for temperature control, but for theatrical flair. Drop it at the right moment, and it redirected attention. Pause too long before picking it up, and you allowed someone else's bouquet to take center stage. Let your fingers brush the wrong flower and, congratulations, you've just accepted someone's apology, or rekindled a feud. Here's a quirky little detail. Some women carried emergency flowers in hidden pockets, tiny substitutions to sneak into offending arrangements. A tucked-away sprig of rue, for regret, a thimble-sized sprig of yarrow, war, or the ultimate Victorian insult. A bit of broom. That meant humility. Which, as you can imagine, no one wanted to be told they needed. It sounds absurd now, like some high society LARP where the elves speak peony. But these tactics weren't just games, they were strategies of influence. A woman might not be allowed to inherit land or vote, but she could destroy a rival's marriage proposal by casually swapping in a marigold. In some elite salons, it even became a tradition to send a floral rebuttal the morning after a particularly charged gathering. Delivered by hand. Wrapped in silk. No explanation needed. A tussie-mussy with thistle, defiance, and buttercup, childishness, meant, you embarrassed yourself, and you know it. You sit, absorbing this, and realize that the bouquet you brought wasn't just an innocent gesture. In this world, nothing was innocent. You gave a tool. A weapon. Or maybe a gift. And now, you have no idea what you've contributed to. Mainstream fact, this was all made more dangerous by the popularity of illustrated floral etiquette pamphlets, which were sold alongside high society magazines. They came with diagrams, where to place bouquets on the table, how to accept or reject a tussie-mussy, and what not to send after a family scandal. There were even charts for suitable apology combinations and appropriate seasonal insults. You don't know whether to laugh or be deeply impressed. And remember how you thought the rose was a safe bet? Joke's on you. In this room, even how fresh the flower is says something. Slightly wilted? This feeling has faded. Crisp and blooming? I'm serious. Still in bud? I'm holding back. And yes, people noticed. There are actual letters from this era with women noting things like, her hyacinth was barely opened. She knew what that meant. She always knows. You look again at your bouquet. It's been left on the table like a relic of war. Slightly bruised. A few petals fallen. No one's picked it up. Not even the maid, and she's gathered 3 other arrangements already. That's not forgetfulness. That's commentary. And as one guest brushes past you and lets a single violet drop beside your chair, you realize, someone just said something. Directly to you. And you have no idea what it was. Your eyes lock on that violet on the floor. It's small. Barely noticeable. A deep shade of purple, crushed slightly at the edge where it hit the floor. You don't dare reach for it. Not yet. You want to know what it means before you touch it. Because, in this room, even the act of picking up a flower can be mistaken for acceptance. Or regret. Or desire, depending on who's watching. Violets, you recall with growing unease, are loaded. They can mean modesty, yes. Or faithfulness. But in certain contexts, and with certain shades, they also whisper of hidden affection. Or mourning a love that never was. So now, you sit frozen, with what might be a floral confession of love, or a floral eulogy, lying 5 inches from your boot. And it's then you remember, This is the power of the tussie-mussy. The Victorian love of flowers wasn't limited to grand centerpieces and strategic bouquets. It also extended to these tiny, highly curated hand bouquets, pocket-sized and brimming with meaning. Tussie-mussies, also called nosegays, which, yes, still sounds like a Dickensian insult, were more than just accessories. They were coded telegrams disguised as garden cuttings. You'd see them everywhere, pinned to gowns, nestled in gloved hands, even dangling from chatelaine chains like fragrant jewelry. They were small enough to hide but potent enough to make or break a relationship. And they had rules. So many rules. First, the construction, tightly bound, often wrapped in lace or a doily, and frequently inserted into a decorative silver holder known as a posy holder. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about fragrance. Remember, this was pre-deodorant Victorian England. A well-constructed tussie-mussy did double duty as both message and air freshener. Second, the arrangement. It was hierarchical. The central flower was the theme, the statement piece. Supporting flowers around it offered nuance, backup, sometimes even contradiction. A violet in the middle? Sweet and faithful. Add rue around it? Suddenly it's bitter loyalty. Add time? Maybe you're suggesting someone's running out of time. It was a whole bouquet of read between the lines. You imagine receiving one from someone you've only spoken to twice. It's handed off without a word. Tucked into your glove while you're distracted. You open it later and read the message, a pink carnation, gratitude, clover, think of me, and white heather, good luck. Your heart pounds. You start to read everything differently. Was their glance across the room flirtation? Or pity? Did they mean to brush your sleeve, or was it the corset restricting movement again? Historians still argue whether tussie-mussies were more about genuine courtship or social posturing. There's strong evidence that they played both roles, especially in upper-class circles where open declarations were frowned upon but suggestive silence was practically a sport. A quirky detail lost to time, some young women were known to practice tussie drills. Yes, actual rehearsals. Like military exercises but with bouquets. They'd line up in parlors and practice presenting, receiving, and decoding floral messages. Some even blindfolded themselves to identify blooms by scent. Because in a world where your marriage prospects might depend on recognizing a wilted scabiosa, you had to stay sharp. There were even books, not dictionaries, but full-blown tussie-mussy design guides, devoted to building the perfect tiny bouquet for every occasion. For a suitor who was late. For a friend with unfortunate taste in hats. For your sister who may or may not be lying. You didn't improvise your nosegay. You crafted it like a scented essay. In some households, receiving a tussie-mussy became a sort of ritual. The recipient would retreat to a private room, dismantle the bouquet, and consult their own floral dictionary in hushed tones. Some women even kept little notebooks recording the bouquets they received, like floral diaries. You imagine flipping through one now. June 4th, yellow rose, nettle, bluebell. Jealousy, pain, and humility. Delivered by footman. Unclear who sent it. June 8, ivy and white rose. Devotion and purity. Found in glove compartment. Possibly from Richard. June 10th, only rue. Again, there's something oddly touching about that level of effort. In a world where touching someone's hand could be scandalous, where courtship was all but conducted through eyelash flutters and seasonal ball invitations, a tussie-mussy was practically emotional nudity. You glance back at the violet still lying near your foot. No one has acknowledged it. The room hums with distant piano chords and the clink of teacups, but no one comments. And yet, you know it was meant for you. That's the worst part. Or the best. You reach for it. Gently. Slowly. You don't pick it up. You just rest your fingers beside it, close enough to seem interested, far enough to still claim innocence. Because that's how you play the game. And now, someone else knows that you know. There's a term for this kind of silent acknowledgement, floral consent. A nod. A glance. A single hand movement. All calibrated to the dance of petals and propriety. No words. No scandal. Just suggestion. Mainstream fact, tussie-mussies weren't only for lovers. They were used to express everything from gratitude to grief, and often exchanged between family members, friends, and even political allies. During a particularly tense diplomatic dinner in 1870, a British ambassador reportedly passed a tussie-mussy containing olive branches, peace, dandelions, loyalty, and a single crocus, rebirth, to a Prussian counterpart. The response? A tussie-mussy with wormwood and white poppies, bitterness and forgetfulness. probably not a great sign for treaty negotiations. You imagine a modern version of this. What would your morning commute look like if everyone carried tussie-mussies? Instead of honking, you'd wave a bouquet of thistles and marigolds out the car window. Learn to merge, fool, but also, I hope you heal. As you finally, very casually, pick up the violet and tuck it into your palm, you realize you've crossed a line. Not a bad one, but a quiet one. Someone in this room just told you something. And you've silently replied, I heard you. You're still holding the violet in your palm, its velvet petal brushing your glove like a whisper. It doesn't feel like a flower anymore, it feels like a letter. A fragile one, written in a dialect that requires intuition, etiquette, and a borderline unhealthy obsession with floristry. You glance around the room. Nobody meets your eyes. That, of course, is the point. The tension has quieted. You're not the center of attention, yet. But you've entered a different tier of the conversation now. Not the one spoken aloud, but the one unfolding invisibly between bouquets and blossoms. The real dialogue. And in this social chessboard of petticoats and petals, your next move matters. You rise, carefully. Slowly. The violet tucked in your palm like a calling card. Across the room, a side table is arranged with various small blooms and empty posy holders. A sort of make-your-own message buffet. No labels. No instructions. Just instinct, memory, and judgment. You approach, aware that even choosing to build a bouquet in public is a statement in itself. It's like grabbing the mic at a poetry slam and saying, I've got some thoughts. Now here's the challenge. How do you reply in the same delicate dialect? You scan the table. Marjoram, comfort.ivy, fidelity.a small pansy, thoughts of you.lavender, distrust, in some books, devotion in others. Dangerous. But intriguing. This is the Victorian equivalent of assembling a text message with gifs, each one loaded, each one open to misinterpretation. But that's the fun of it. The risk is what makes it matter. You start with pansy. That's your opening line. Thoughts of you. Not too strong. Not too vague. You pair it with a soft sprig of myrtle, true love. Not necessarily romantic love, but love. The kind that sits quietly in a room, watching, waiting. The kind that leaves violets behind. Then, hesitantly, you add a stem of sage, esteem. Not flattery. Not flustered blushing. Just respect. It evens the bouquet, gives it weight. And finally, a tiny bloom of pink rosebud, barely opened. You remember that from one of the guides, a budding affection. A feeling not yet declared, but present. Real. Historians still argue whether flowers were actually intended as firm declarations or soft invitations. Some say the Victorians liked their boundaries blurry. Others believe this whole floral enterprise was just an elaborate form of social procrastination, putting off hard conversations under layers of petals. Still, for a society that prized repression, a bouquet could say what no person dared to speak aloud. Here's a quirky tidbit: some elite flower clubs hosted bouquet duels. No swords, no insults. Just back and forth tussie-mussies exchanged during tea. Each bouquet had to build on the last, respond, rebuke, or reframe the message. The winner? The one whose bouquet was most witty and legible. Judges wore gloves. Scoring was anonymous. Think rap battle, but scented. You wrap your bouquet with a simple white ribbon and walk, not across the room, but to the empty piano bench. You set the flowers down, delicately, clearly, not hiding them, but not calling attention either. You walk away. You don't turn back. It's not a declaration. It's a question. And now the bouquet becomes something else entirely, an open door. You sit, pretending interest in a conversation about wallpaper stencils, while your mind is fully elsewhere. You steal a glance only once. Someone has moved. A figure you can't quite place, a guest who was quiet all evening, now sits at the piano bench. Their posture says nothing. But their hand rests near your bouquet. Not touching. Just near. As if absorbing its message. And so begins the silent conversation. Mainstream fact: in some households, it was considered polite to respond to a bouquet within 48 hours. The reply could be another bouquet, a formal card with a single petal pressed into the paper, or, in bolder cases, a returned bouquet missing exactly one flower. A subtle way of saying, I accept this part. But not that one. Imagine ghosting someone in Victorian times by returning their bouquet with the main flower removed. That's a statement. That's a botanical breakup text. You shift in your chair. Time slows. The sounds of the room grow hazy. Someone plays a waltz on the pianoforte, slow and soft. Cups clink against saucers like wind chimes. A lace fan flutters like wings. And there it is, the person at the piano bench lifts your bouquet. Not all the way. Just slightly. Then places it back down, only now, it's turned ever so slightly toward the center of the room. That's the response. Not full acceptance. Not rejection. But openness. Curiosity. Maybe even interest. You exhale, barely, because that's how this world works. A single bloom can stir suspicion. A missing petal can signal trust. A half turn of a ribbon can change everything. Florography, you realize, is less about telling the truth than about shaping it, gently, with fragrance and foliage. You're not locked into your words. You're growing them. Tending them. Trimming when necessary. And for the first time this evening, you feel as though you belong in the room. Not because you navigated the conversation about tea imports or nodded at the correct scandal, but because you joined the quieter dialogue. The one everyone's speaking without sound. And now, you wonder, what will your next bouquet say? You step outside, just for a moment. Air. Real air. Not the heavily perfumed swirl of gardenia and powdered guests. The night is crisp, the moon sits like a clean coin in a dish of velvet, and the city sounds have softened into an ambient hush. You take the deepest breath you've had all evening, and what hits you isn't silence. It's scent. Because out here, in the dimly lit garden behind the townhouse, the real flowers are blooming. Not cut. Not trimmed into coated bouquets. Just growing. Wild, or as wild as the carefully maintained beds of a Victorian estate can get. It's an entirely different world. Out here, you remember, flowers don't have to mean anything. They just are. And yet, because you've been trained by drawing rooms and dictionaries and whispered tussy-mussies, your brain can't help but interpret. You walk past a row of night-blooming jasmine, sweetness and grace, and a patch of moonlit poppies, sleep, oblivion, forgetting. One bloom, half hidden under a hedge, catches your eye, honeysuckle. Climbing stubbornly over the trellis, fragrant and uninvited. That meant bond of love, if you remember right. Clingy, yes. But honest. There's something grounding about this unspoken garden. No curated bouquets. No posy holders. Just growing things, spilling over where they shouldn't, ignoring symbolism, vibrating with messy, unapologetic life. It reminds you of something historians still debate, whether the Victorian obsession with florography was about expression, or control. Did people truly want to speak from the heart? Or did they want to manage their feelings? Package them in pansies. Wrap their grief in lavender. Filter their love through roses and lace and perfectly printed floral dictionaries. You pause at the garden bench. Someone else is here. You didn't see them at first, because they weren't trying to be seen. Just a silhouette under a willow, the glow of a lantern haloing their shoulders. And in their hands, not a bouquet, but a living flower. Still rooted in the earth. They're studying it like it might whisper a secret. You clear your throat softly. They don't startle. They just glance up, meet your eyes, and offer a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not an invitation. Not a warning. Just acknowledgement. You recognize them now. The one who turned your bouquet at the piano. The one who placed the violet. They say nothing. But they gesture slightly toward the plant beside them. Lily of the Valley. One of the most symbolically dense flowers in Victorian lore. Return of happiness. Purity. But also, danger and innocence. You kneel to look. You're not here to decode a message, you're here to share a moment. The flower glows, just a little, in the lantern light. Its tiny bells nod as if agreeing with everything unspoken. Here's a quirky fact you remember: in certain rural traditions, Lily of the Valley was seen as a protective flower. Superstition held that if you wore one while traveling, your heart would remain yours, no matter how many glances or gloved hands tried to steal it. The two of you don't speak. There's no need. Out here, the language of flowers doesn't shout. It just settles around you like mist. And it's quieter. Gentler. Less about maneuvering, more about feeling. You notice they're holding a small stem of something you hadn't seen before, woodruff. You rack your brain. What does that mean again? Humility? Hidden worth? You realize you don't know. And that, for once, is perfectly fine. Mainstream fact: there were hundreds of flower dictionaries in circulation during the Victorian period, many with conflicting definitions. Some were marketed as for lovers, others for grieving families, and still others for young ladies of refinement. It was entirely possible for two people to interpret the same flower in wildly different ways. Which makes you wonder, maybe the real meaning wasn't in the book, but in the giving. Maybe the bouquet mattered less than the moment it was passed between hands. You reach down and gently brush your fingers against the lily's bell. Its stem trembles. You think you hear something, footsteps in the garden. The world doesn't stop, but for this flicker of time, something has settled. Like dust on silk. Like the pause before dawn. You sit beside them. Not touching. Not turning. Just being. The garden continues breathing. A moth flutters by. Somewhere inside, the piano picks up again. A nocturne now, something wistful and pale. You think about all the bouquets sitting abandoned in glass vases inside that house. How many meant more than the senders realized? How many were misunderstood? Misread? Rewritten with a pair of clippers and a splash of water? And you think about how simple this moment is, with one rooted flower and no explanation. Out here, there's no need for a coded dictionary. No scandal, no positioning. Just the soft scent of night blooms and the knowledge that something was said, even if you'll never be entirely sure what. You look over once more. They're still holding the woodruff. Still not speaking. That, you understand, is their bouquet. And this silence, is your answer. You return indoors with soil still clinging to your thoughts. The transition is stark. The air is perfumed again, dry and heavy with floral arrangements curated for effect, not comfort. You'd almost forgotten the perfume of wild honeysuckle, how it lacked ambition, how it simply was. In contrast, this room smells like everyone's trying too hard. Like 100 intentions bumping into each other at once, wrapped in lace. The drawing room has shifted while you were gone. The conversation has thinned, the light dimmed. Guests recline a little more deeply in their chairs. Fans flutter lazily. But the flowers, oh, the flowers, are just getting started. This is when the meanings change. You may not have known this before, but Victorian flower language isn't static. It's situational. A carnation at noon says something different than one at dusk. The same rose given in a ballroom means one thing, and quite another if placed silently on a stairwell. And when midnight creeps closer, meanings deepen, sometimes darken. Historians still argue whether this time-shifted symbolism was an accepted system or more of a social hallucination. But there's documented evidence that certain floral messages were considered inappropriate after a certain hour. Which is deliciously Victorian, because what could possibly make a pansy scandalous? Yet here you are, watching a woman rearrange her bouquet now that the candles have burned lower. She replaces one flower with a darker bloom, then tucks the original into her bodice. That means something. Probably something he will understand. Across the room, someone else discreetly presses a petal into a folded note and sends it off with a footman. The note might say nothing but thank you. But the flower? A deep blue hyacinth? Constancy, or please don't change your mind. You've re-entered a world where people speak in glances and reply in flowers. Mainstream fact. Late evening gatherings often saw the emergence of floral whispers, subtle acts like removing a bloom mid-conversation, or brushing a bouquet with one's hand while discussing a third party. These gestures, widely understood by those in the know, could express flirtation, dismissal, or even rivalry. At certain salons, floral whispering became an unofficial game, judged silently by the host's expression. One particularly dramatic case from 1882 involved a scandalous series of such gestures at a London dinner party. A bouquet of sweet pea and heliotrope was subtly repositioned 3 times over the course of the night, first toward the fireplace, then away, then placed upside down in the window. The final arrangement was interpreted by one guest as a marriage proposal and by another as a declaration of emotional warfare. It led to an engagement, a duel, and at least 2 ruined reputations. You can't make this up. Well, maybe someone did make it up. But if enough people believe the story, doesn't that make it real in its own way? Here's a quirky detail. In some circles, a popular parlor game involved assigning guests secret flowers upon arrival, tucked into place cards or sewn into napkin rings. Each guest had to interpret their assigned bloom by evening's end, either by observation or through interaction. Mistakes were common, and more than one guest ended the night feeling very secure in a love that didn't exist. You scan the room, noticing what's changed since you stepped outside. That rival pair, Lady Featherstone and the Countess of Whitmore, no longer have their competing arrangements on display. Instead, both bouquets sit together on the same side table. Intertwined. You wonder what happened? A truce? An alliance? Or maybe just the strategic appearance of peace before the next flower-fueled ambush. And the piano has gone silent. The player is now at the far end of the room, delicately tucking a daffodil, new beginnings, into the hand of someone you hadn't seen before. Their fingers brush for a moment. Then they separate like dancers in a final pose. You take it all in. Every arrangement here is saying something. Some are loud, bold combinations, dramatic color. Others are so restrained they whisper rather than speak. The ones with too many meanings stacked together, the floral equivalent of a nervous rambler. The ones with only a single flower, confident, direct, possibly dangerous. You remember the bouquet you left on the piano. It's gone now. You're not sure who took it, or when. And that's the thing about florography at night, it's not about clear communication. It's about suggestion. You may never know exactly what your flowers said, only that they were seen. And that someone, somewhere in this velvet and violet labyrinth, chose to respond. There's a comfort in that ambiguity. After a day, or a lifetime, of pretending to be direct, it's nice to slip into a world where intention is folded up in petals. Where nobody expects you to be blunt. Where everything you might want to say is allowed to bloom slowly, silently, and be received without explanation. And now, someone hands you a flower. You don't see who. It's passed to you discreetly, hand to hand, like a secret. It's a snowdrop. That could mean hope. Or consolation. Or just remember me when the frost returns. You hold it, quietly. You don't need to ask what it means. You already know. You don't move for a while. The snowdrop rests in your hand, cool, delicate, impossibly light. And for the first time tonight, you don't feel like you're playing catch-up. You're not decoding or questioning or second-guessing. You're just holding a flower. And that's enough. It's funny how something so small can carry so much. Not in weight, but in meaning. Or maybe in possibility. And here's the twist you didn't see coming. The longer you participate in this silent language of petals and glances, the more you realize that you've started thinking in flowers. You begin to translate thoughts automatically. An apology becomes ivy and crocus. Annoyance becomes yellow carnation and snapdragon. Curiosity? Maybe sweet pea with a hint of rosemary. Every feeling has a bloom now. Every passing glance becomes a potential bouquet. It's oddly liberating, this coded vocabulary where nothing has to be said aloud. Where feelings aren't crushed into neat little syllables but allowed to unfold leaf by leaf. Of course, not everyone in the Victorian world embraced this language. Historians still argue over its seriousness. Was it really a deeply ingrained form of communication across society? Or just an elite parlor trick, another way to pass the time between scandal and supper? You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. For some, it was performance. For others, poetry. And for the quiet ones, the ones who watched more than they spoke, it was everything. You think of those who couldn't speak freely. Women in unhappy marriages. Closeted lovers. Grieving parents. People who had to live inside the lines drawn for them, and who found in flowers a way to step outside, even if only for a moment. Here's a quirky detail. Some households kept a secret vase near the door. A place where family members could leave flower messages for each other when words were too difficult. A posy of rue on the mantle? Regret. A bundle of daisies left on a sister's pillow? Innocence. Love. Forgiveness. It wasn't just courtship. It was communication. And not all bouquets were romantic. You spot one now, in a shadowy corner of the drawing room, a subtle arrangement of rosemary, angelica, and a single daffodil. That's not a love letter. That's a goodbye. Someone here is leaving, moving abroad, perhaps, or stepping away from society after some unspoken scandal. But they've chosen to say farewell in flowers. A soft exit. A way of turning the last page without the weight of farewell parties and social consequences. You imagine receiving a bouquet like that. What would yours say, if you were to leave tomorrow? Maybe chamomile, for patience. Maybe wild thyme, for courage. Maybe one small sprig of forget-me-not. You suddenly wonder about the people in your own life. If you had to craft a bouquet for each of them, what would you choose? What would you hope they understood? What would you hope they forgave? You watch a guest stand quietly from her chair, cradling a small bouquet close to her chest like a whispered truth. She walks to the front door, not dramatically, just gently. A friend joins her. They don't speak. They don't need to. It's one of the few exits you've ever seen that felt finished. Like nothing was left unsaid. Like the flowers said it all. You rise too. Not to leave. Just to move. To breathe. To feel your feet beneath you. As you cross the room, you notice again how no two arrangements are alike. Every bouquet is a fingerprint. a fragment of someone's inner world, preserved in petals and stems. You pass a cluster of bouquets on a sideboard, some grand, some modest. One is just a single sprig of fennel. Another has 7 carefully arranged blooms, all red, all fiery. You don't need a dictionary to guess what that one means. Mainstream fact: some Victorian hosts would press the most memorable bouquet of the evening into a scrapbook, a keepsake of unspoken conversations. Over time, these books became treasured heirlooms, floral diaries of entire social seasons, annotated only with initials and dates. Imagine flipping through one now. What stories would unfold between the petals? You find a spot by the window. The air is cooler here, and you catch a glimpse of the moon again. The garden has gone still, its earlier magic resting beneath layers of shadow and dew. You can still smell honeysuckle on the breeze, faint and fading. You look down at the snowdrop in your hand, still intact, still trembling slightly. And for some reason, you don't want to keep it. Not because it means nothing, but because it meant something. And sometimes, the best way to honor that is to let it go. You walk over to the mantel, where a tall vase holds a simple arrangement of white flowers, lilies, hyacinths, pale roses. Nothing showy. Nothing loud. Just soft things. You tuck the snowdrop gently into the side, not hiding it, but not centering it either. A gesture, not a performance. A note in the margin. If someone sees it, fine. If not, also fine, because not every flower needs to be read. Some are just there to be. You turn back to the room. The drawing room, for all its ceremony, has softened. The hour is late. The game is quieting. And so are you. You drift toward the far end of the drawing room, where the chatter is quieter and the light dips into amber pools. There's something sacred about the edges of a party, where the formalities wear thinner and truth, like jasmine, starts to bloom in the dark. You settle into a velvet armchair near the hearth. A small table beside you holds what looks like a forgotten bouquet, tied with a simple piece of twine. No lace, no show. It's a curious mix: tansy, basil, a frayed iris, and something you can't immediately place. Not the usual ballroom declaration. You lean in. Tansy, resistance. Basil, hatred, though in some dictionaries, best wishes. Iris, message, or sometimes faith. And that last one? It's betony. A bit obscure. One dictionary called it surprise. Another, healing from a secret wound. This isn't a love letter. This is a confession. Left behind, possibly on purpose. Maybe someone didn't want it seen. Or maybe they wanted exactly one person to find it, and tonight it's you. Historians still argue whether these ambiguous bouquets were deliberate acts or happy accidents. Was the sender carefully crafting emotional landmines? Or just tossing petals into the wind and hoping they'd land somewhere meaningful? Either way, people kept finding significance in them. That's the magic of flower language at its murkiest. It's not about clarity, but about invitation. An open door to wonder, to imagine, to fill in the gaps with your own longing. Here's a quirky bit of etiquette. If you found a discarded bouquet at a party, you were technically supposed to ignore it. To pick it up was seen as invasive, unless you had reason to believe it was meant for you. Of course, reason was subjective. And polite society loved nothing more than towing the line of scandal without ever quite tripping over it. You gently lift the bouquet. You're not claiming it, just inspecting it. And suddenly, the act feels intimate, almost transgressive. You wonder who tied it. Who picked betony? Who paired hatred and healing in the same breath? There's a poignancy to it. Someone is trying to let go of something. Or someone. You don't take it with you. You set it back on the table, just a hair more upright, as if to say, I see you. I understand. Across the room, another guest does something curious. She removes a single flower from her bouquet and tucks it into the ribbon of a young man's lapel. A simple gesture. But the flower is wolfsbane. You blank. Wolfsbane, misanthropy. Or in some circles, you're dangerous. He doesn't react, at least not outwardly. But he doesn't remove it either. And suddenly that exchange feels like the entire plot of a novel, one that will never be written, but whose first chapter you just witnessed. Mainstream fact: some Victorian plays included entire scenes structured around florography. The audience would know the meanings, but the characters on stage might not, making every bouquet a double entendre, every corsage a plot twist. There was even a short-lived trend of floral-themed operas. One, The Petal and the Thorn, included an aria sung entirely to a nosegay. It was either tragic or hilarious, depending on the soprano's lung power. The fire in the hearth crackles softly. Shadows flicker like petals stirred by wind. Around you, the drawing room seems to exhale. The guests aren't leaving yet, but the energy has shifted. No one's trying to impress anymore. The bouquets lie loosely in laps now. Some have fallen apart slightly. A few guests have removed their gloves. You notice a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, holding a single daisy. She's spinning it gently, unaware of the way her thoughts show on her face. For her, this is all still wonder. She's not here to play the social game. She's here because flowers are pretty. And maybe that's where it starts. Not with books or salons or etiquette. Just that moment when someone realizes a daisy feels different in your hand depending on who gave it to you. You think back to your first flower. Not tonight. Before. Was it a gift? A secret? A joke? Was it pressed between the pages of a diary? Or thrown from a stage at a school play? Whatever it was, you remember how much it said without saying anything. That's the true nature of florography. It isn't about knowing the meanings. It's about having something to mean. You look down at your empty hands and realize they don't feel empty at all. You've carried and released so much tonight. Regret. Curiosity. Admiration. Something like affection. Maybe even a question you didn't know you needed to ask. And you never said a word. You rise from the chair slowly now, the velvet sighing beneath you like an exhale. Your body's still and quiet, but your thoughts bloom like wild roses, layered, fragrant, and just a little unruly. The party is thinning. Not dramatically, there are still scattered conversations and glasses half full, but the urgency has gone out of the room. People no longer look for the next person to impress. Instead, they pause to feel the weight of the evening settle on their shoulders, like the smell of roses after rain. You move toward the hall, past a cluster of guests murmuring near the door. They barely notice you. One of them clutches a bouquet so tightly that petals have begun to crumple between her fingers. You wonder what she's trying to hold on to. And now, in the soft shadow of the corridor, you see it. A display. Not large. Not announced. Just a simple wooden cabinet with glass doors. Inside, dozens of pressed flowers, arranged with almost obsessive care. Under each bloom, a handwritten label. June 3rd, White Camellia, I forgive you. September 12th, Clematis, mental strength when you couldn't speak. November 2nd, Yellow Carnation, rejection, but kindly. You stare, drawn in. It's not a museum piece, it's a memory book. A visual record of invisible conversations. A flower diary where every entry is a moment preserved between heartbeats. And suddenly you understand something. This house doesn't just host florography. It collects it. Every guest who leaves a flower, on a mantle, in a glove, tucked between books, is participating in a ritual far older than this parlor. Something more human than etiquette. Something quieter than speech. A ritual of being known without having to explain yourself. You wonder if your snowdrop will end up in here. Maybe in a few days, someone will press it between parchment, label it carefully, and file it beside hundreds of others. And long after tonight is forgotten by those who danced and drank and traded gossip, your little flower will still whisper, "Remember me. I was here." Here's a quirky tradition you hadn't heard before. In some Victorian houses, when a particularly meaningful bouquet was received, the recipient would trace each flower with a fine-tipped pen onto a linen handkerchief. The outlines were then embroidered, silk thread for emotions too strong for words. A way of keeping the message close, in something soft enough to cry into. You think of the bouquet you built earlier. Pansy, myrtle, sage, pink rosebud. You didn't stitch it, but it's stitched into you now. Mainstream fact, despite their deep associations with courtship and emotion, florographic gifts were not always gentle. There are records of bouquets used to shame, to threaten, even to manipulate. A tightly bundled sprig of wormwood and yellow lily left anonymously on someone's doorstep was the 19th century equivalent of a subtweet. You reach out, almost unconsciously, and rest your hand on the glass of the flower cabinet. You don't open it. You just feel it, solid, cool, holding so much softness within. So many things unsaid, all carefully preserved. And that's when it happens. You feel a small tap at your elbow. You turn. It's the guest from earlier. The one who placed the violet. The one who sat with you beneath the willow. They're here now, face unreadable but gentle, and in their gloved hand is another bouquet. No ribbon. No lace. Just stems and sincerity. They offer it to you without a word. You take it. Slowly. Inside, 2 white violets. A sprig of rosemary. A single petal of red clover. You don't need a dictionary. You feel it in your throat, soft and tight. White violet, innocence, taken too soon. Rosemary, remembrance. Red clover, be mine. Or sometimes, promise me you'll stay. You hold it like an answer you didn't know you were waiting for. And when you look up, they're already walking away. No need for goodbyes. In flowerography, the flowers say goodbye for you. You tuck the bouquet close to your chest, feeling the stems press lightly against your ribs, grounding you. And as the house grows quieter, as candles burn lower, and guests slip away into carriages and night air, you remain still. Not because you're lingering, but because something inside you just settled. And you realize, you're not just learning the language of flowers. You're starting to speak it. You're the last one in the room now. Not quite alone. There's still a maid gathering empty cups and smoothing out cushions with the quiet efficiency of someone who's watched 100 evenings unravel just like this. But the heart of the gathering is gone. The voices have faded, the laughter echoes faintly from the front steps, and only the scent of mingled blossoms remains, heavy and ghost-like. You linger by the fireplace. The embers glow low, like the soft eyes of a cat blinking at you from a distance. The bouquet still rests in your hands, violets, rosemary, red clover. You study it not as an object but as a story. Yours. Theirs. This evening's. And maybe, somehow, something more. You move slowly now, letting the hush of the room carry you. Past the scattered gloves and half-drunk teacups. Past the faint imprint of bodies in velvet cushions. You notice the trails of the evening now, the evidence of things unspoken. A flower dropped here. A hand fan left behind. A handkerchief stained faintly with rouge and regret. You pause by the cabinet again. The flower diary. You want to open it now. To slip your bouquet between its pages, to etch this moment into memory while it's still warm. But you hesitate. This message, isn't finished yet. Here's a mainstream fact to carry with you. The Victorians often kept talking bouquets on their writing desks, changing them weekly to reflect their moods or intentions. Visitors would read the bouquet before speaking, adjusting their tone accordingly. It was emotional armor, delicate but effective. You imagine how your own desk bouquet might look now. A small pine sprig for resilience, mint for virtue, and something bright and yellow, solidago, maybe, for encouragement. Encouragement for what, exactly? Well, for being here. For staying in the moment long enough to feel it. For reading the room not with your eyes but with your heart. There's a chair near the window you hadn't noticed before. It faces the garden, just barely catching the light of the rising moon. You sit, the bouquet still in hand, and watch as the last flicker of motion vanishes into the street, carriages clattering off into the dark, their lamps trailing like fireflies. Behind you, the house seems to exhale. Walls relax. Drapes settle. And even the flowers, the real ones, not the symbolic ones, seem to shift in their vases like they're finally done holding secrets. Historians still debate whether the flower codes had lasting social power or were simply a seasonal pastime. But sitting here, in this chair, in this hushed room full of fading petals and tangled meanings, you feel the truth of it deep in your chest. Whether it was a game, a ritual, or a coping mechanism, it mattered. Because sometimes people just need a way to say things they don't have words for. You think back over the evening, the pansy, the sage, the snowdrop, the stranger in the garden. You remember how much was said without a single sentence spoken aloud. Here's a quirky footnote from history. Some florists in London used to offer message services, where you could send anonymous bouquets based on a numbered guide. You'd walk into the shop, choose message 11B, perhaps I see through you, and they'd bundle the blooms accordingly. It was love letters by proxy, floral, fragrant, and emotionally dangerous. You smile faintly. Not everything needs to be decoded. Some bouquets are puzzles, others are poems. And yours? Yours is somewhere in between. A little mystery, a little memory. You don't know what the rest of the story will be. You only know that for a few hours, you walked through a world where feelings bloomed in silence, and you listened. You lean back in the chair. Your eyes drift to the moonlit glass. The bouquet rests now on your lap, its stems warm from your hands. You don't need to press it into a book tonight. You'll remember it. Because what mattered most wasn't what it meant, but that it was given. You remain in the chair longer than you meant to. Not because you're waiting, but because you finally stopped chasing meaning. The night has passed through you like a current, slow and strange and scented with hundreds of tiny messages. And now? You simply float in its wake. The window pane beside you has fogged faintly from your breath. Outside, the garden is a tangle of silver silhouettes. The moon has shifted, higher now, cooler. The same blossoms that felt romantic earlier seem quieter now, humbled by the hour. The jasmine no longer flirts. The lilies no longer preen. They rest, Like you. There's something sacred about the stillness after everything. You stand slowly. The bouquet, your last one, rests on the windowsill, angled toward the light. You don't pick it up again. You let it be. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it already did. Its message was heard. Its moment passed. Like all flowers, it never asked to last forever. And that's the hardest thing about florography. It teaches you how to mean things without possessing them. How to hold an emotion lightly, like a petal, and let it fall when the time comes. Mainstream fact: some Victorians believed certain flower messages only worked when they were let go. A bouquet held too long lost its magic. To make your meaning real, you had to place the flowers somewhere, on a step, in a hand, or under a tree, and walk away. The act of leaving it completed the sentence. So, you leave yours here on the windowsill. Facing the moon, you walk the hallway back toward the front of the house. The carpet is soft underfoot. The wallpaper seems to sigh with age. You pass portraits of people who probably never said what they meant. Maybe they had their own secret bouquets. Maybe that's all they left behind. Near the coat rack, someone has tucked a single marigold into an umbrella stand. You don't touch it. You just smile. Marigold, grief, or comfort in sorrow, depending on which book you read. A farewell, perhaps. Or a benediction. The door creaks gently as you open it. The city beyond is velvet dark, quiet in that uniquely Victorian way, chimneys puffing faint smoke, gas lamps flickering like candle stubs, horses in the distance sounding tired but dutiful. You step outside and pull the door closed behind you with a soft click. The night wraps around you. You walk slowly. No urgency. Just the rhythm of your own breathing and the whisper of petals still brushing your thoughts. And you realize, you've changed. Not in a grand, dramatic way, but in the quiet way that stories change you. The way being understood, even without words, can rearrange something inside you. Here's the last quirky fact of the evening: some Victorians believed that people carried invisible bouquets with them everywhere they went. That every time you looked at someone, you were subconsciously offering them a flower, based on your feelings in that moment. Annoyance might be dandelion. Admiration, cornflower. Indifference, a dried sprig of dockweed. And now you wonder, what flowers have you been offering lately, without realizing it? You walk into the night, imagining bouquets blooming invisibly from your shoulders, your hands, your thoughts. A bit dramatic, sure, but you're allowed that now. You earned it. Word count, 1103. Wind down, 300 words. Now, as your eyes grow heavier and the world softens at the edges, let this story of flowers drift into the quiet part of your mind. Let the language of blossoms, their patience, their gentleness, stay with you just a little longer. No more bouquets to build. No more meanings to decipher. Just the calm that comes after everything has been said, even if only in petals. Imagine yourself walking once more through the garden, barefoot this time. The grass cool beneath your feet. The air rich with the scent of unopened roses. No need to pick anything. No need to name what you feel. Everything around you knows already. You pass a lavender bush. A row of sleepy daffodils. A tree whose leaves sway like lullabies. There's nothing urgent. Nothing unfinished. Just moonlight and breath and the hush that flowers must feel when the world finally sleeps. Each step brings you deeper into stillness. Each flower you pass nods, as if agreeing, you're here. You're safe. You can rest. So now, rest. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let your thoughts soften like fallen petals. Let the hush of 100 floral messages wrap around you like a warm, fragrant shawl. You've said enough. You've heard enough. Let the flowers keep watch now. You're allowed to sleep.
Tới đây luôn á. quay máy là quay gỡ cho anh Thịnh.
Quay nó không có rõ đâu, không quay nó không có rõ. Nói xịn kìa chứ nói này quay đâu.
Thì chớp nhán được rồi. dàn tới đây luôn á. Lấy máy là quay gửi cho anh Thịnh.
quay nó không có đỏ đâu, không quay như vậy. Không có đỏ. Má xịn kìa, chứ nói này rồi đâu.
Thì chớp nhán nhán được rồi. Dàn tới đây luôn á.